Welcome back to the Buckeye Breakdown Podcast, where Buckeyes Now on Sports Illustrated continues to cover the Ohio State Buckeyes as they get ready for the 2021 season. And training camp is so close to being done. We are this close to starting to turn the page now toward week one, as the Buckeyes and Minnesota Golden Gophers are only 10 days away from the first kickoff of the season. Alongside Andrew Lind, I'm Brendan Gulick. Because this was the second last training camp media availability today, Andrew, we got a chance to talk with one. I guess we still have one more, but one of the final position groups. We got to talk with secondary coach Matt Barnes and many of his defensive backs at safety today. And coming up on Wednesday, we'll hear from Brian Hartline and his wide receivers. That's certainly something you don't want to miss. But I think most of our conversation today will probably revolve around the defensive backs, because obviously, man, this is a huge focal point going into the season, considering what happened to the Buckeyes in 2020. So why don't we start with Matt Barnes? How about just off the top, your biggest takeaway from a guy who's in a new role this year?
Yeah, and listening to him talk, it seems like it's a challenge that he kind of is welcomed. I know that obviously moving Kerry away from coaching a secondary to then being the whole defensive coordinator, overseeing everybody versus that specific unit, has kind of allowed Matt to kind of put his own spin on the secondary and especially the safety. So it's definitely a good thing, and that he's kind of allowed to, really mold into that role.
I think the biggest takeaway I had was his comment about, I have the littlest ego of any football coach you're going to meet. Most guys don't necessarily admit that, even if they feel that way. You get the sense that he is grateful for the promotion he received in the offseason. You certainly get the sense that he's got a lot of faith in this group this year. But we've heard from Kerry Combs, who I guess is technically now his boss as the defensive coordinator, even though they work, really in tandem. You get the sense that these guys have a really good working relationship. Kerry has raved about Matt's work ethic and attention to detail, and his ability to relate to guys and really teach some technique, where then Kerry can be a little more big picture, a little more energetic. So far so good, I guess, through camp, right? Those two guys feel like they've got a good thing going. We'll evaluate the progress once the season starts, but at least seems to be off on a good foot.
Well, I think the fact that Kerry, was willing to kind of give up those reins kind of speaks to what he thinks of Matt as a coach and as a person, and his ability to relate to players and teach technique and those kind of things. Because really, if it was one of those things where, he wasn't comfortable with that and he wasn't okay with who was replacing him in that role, it wouldn't have happened. Like, it just doesn't make sense otherwise. So to get somebody like Matt Barnes, who is a very personable person, and is able to connect with recruits and players, like, that's only going to benefit them in the long term.
Buckeye secondary is certainly going to be under a magnifying glass right out of the gates this year. And it's not because Minnesota has some crazy vaunted passing attack. It's because that's the group that struggled most in 2020. I think Ohio State's doing a good job of both not shying away from that, not ignoring the fact that was, frankly, a liability last year, while at the same time trying to just put it behind them and learn from the challenges that last year brought. Got the vibe from the group of guys, and we'll get into them in a minute, but the collective thought there really seemed to me like they feel they've got a pretty versatile group, a pretty athletic group, and guys that have taken some big steps forward in the offseason and perhaps can maybe bring this secondary closer to that BIA title that Buckeye Nation has grown so fond of over the last few years.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of those things where last year they were so bad in the secondary that there's really nowhere to go but up, which to think of Ohio State being in that situation is just kind of unfathomable to begin with. It actually kind of makes me wish that Rashad Bateman was still at Minnesota, because I'd like to see them be tested right away, to show that they are taking those steps. But at the same time, not facing a team in week one, especially before you have to play Oregon, it makes you kind of happy that you have an ability to kind of figure out what best fits in different situations.
Yeah, I I understand that point for sure. And if they go out against a Rashad Bateman type player and really lock him down, that would be quite a statement. I am definitely on the other side of the coin on that. I'm glad that Minnesota doesn't seem on paper to have the kind of passing attack that they've got a good quarterback coming back. They're extremely well coached. But I just don't know if I see Minnesota, launching the ball for 400 yards against the Buckeyes after I think 3 400-yard passing performances against the defense last year. I would much rather see in week one where it's already difficult enough to prepare for a team because you don't have any current tape to go off of. I think week one, and we can talk about this too. I mean, I think week one is maybe the hardest week on the schedule to prepare for because your body's beat up from camp. You're going to go full go for the first time. I can't imagine you're ever going to be, more sore than after that first game. It's kind of a wake-up call reality check for, hey, the season's here and it's time to get going. Starting with a conference game is challenging for sure. It doesn't happen every year, but the Buckeyes don't have the ability to really overcome a loss. I mean, it's pretty rare that a team, loses a game and still makes the college football playoff. It's happened, obviously. It happened to the Buckeyes when they won it all. But it's certainly tough, and you got to be ready to go week one. So not having a team that's going to throw the ball down your throat all day, I think, is something I'm happy about.
Definitely, and that was something that Larry Johnson kind of spoke about last week. That he was asked about the Rushman package and being able to put in, 4 defensive ends along the line and just be able to pin their ears back and all that. But he basically said, like, Minnesota's not going to allow us to do that because that's just not their offensive attack. So to sit there and say, like, is the secondary going to be tested in week one? No. Oregon is already talking about naming a true freshman the starter at quarterback. So it makes you wonder if Oregon's going to air the ball out too. So how long is it before the secondary actually gets tested? And kind of to your point, it's like, maybe they can grow into it. They're generally all new. Sevyn Banks is the only person who's coming back and actually played a ton last year. Cam Brown's coming off injury. So you're really going to, you're going to want to work back into that.
Yeah, Marcus Williamson has a little bit of experience too, and you would think he's going to play a big role this year. Let's talk about some of these defensive backs we heard from today. I don't want to miss anybody. So Court Williams, Josh Proctor, obviously 2 guys that folks were really excited to hear from. Cam Martinez, we heard from Marcus Williamson. 2 guys that really stood out to me, other than Court Williams, Craig Young, who is an athletic specimen. We heard from Ronnie Hickman. I think I mentioned Cam Martinez and Bryson Shaw. They all spoke with the media today after practice. So we don't have to dive into all of them at once, but why don't we start with Craig Young? Because I think he plays a really interesting position now with a pretty good chance, I would think, to see the field a lot in that bullet spot. He's huge. He's 6'3". He's 225. Craig thinks his speed, he was laughing. He had this big cheesy smile on his face today. He said that everybody on the internet's got my 40 time wrong or my 100 time wrong. He goes, I'm a 4.4 guy for sure. I can run, significantly faster than people are saying. Man, if that's true, and watching him sit up there in a really cut tank top, there's a chance this guy could be really, really good. He's obviously still young in the program, but it's hard not to look at him and get pretty excited.
Yeah, and I'll never forget when he was going through the recruiting process, he came to the Woody Hayes Athletic Center for a one-day camp in June 2018. It was when Urban Meyer was still the head coach at the time. And he came in, he was a 4-star wide receiver is what he was ranked as, at least by 247 and Rivals and so forth. And Urban Meyer basically was like, "You're a big, what? Like, I don't know where to put you." And they put him through the ringer. Like, he literally ran, defensive back drills. He was working with Bill Davis, who was the linebackers coach at the time. Greg Schiano. The next thing you know, his hands in the dirt, working with Larry Johnson. They were just basically like, "We don't know where to put you, but we want you." And they offered him that day. And that's kind of become the thing with him. It's like, he's a physical talent, but it's just a matter of finding that place for him.
What a weird thing, and yet what a blessing as a coach, as a coordinator, to know that you feel like you've got a guy that can be a huge weapon, mean, think about if he's that fast, he can play defensive back, no problem. If he's a linebacker, I mean, what running back it's certainly in the Big Ten, what running back is going to run away from him, and most running backs in the country aren't going to be able to run away from him. And perhaps that's a lot of the reason why they're thinking of bringing him up in that bullet spot. But his versatility, his athleticism, and I asked him specifically today because he's been put in a lot of these different positions. I asked him how he feels he's progressed in taking concepts that he sees on film and putting them into play out on the practice field. He said it's something he's worked a ton on and really feels like, there's been a lot thrown at him. So he tries to just pick, one new thing every day that he saw on film from a previous practice that he really wants to try to perfect or at least implement. You just get the sense that the kid's kind of been drinking through a fire hose. But at the same time, you don't want to keep a leash on a guy like that either. You want to let him just go make plays. And if he's that athletic and can get to the ball, unleash him.
Well, that was something that really stood out to me during, during that one-day camp. It was just his willingness to be able to go around and say, I'll do whatever I need to do to get this offer. And I think that's kind of translated to now where he's at within the program. At any point in time, they could have said, we're going to make you a linebacker, we're going to make you a defensive end, we're going to make you a strong safety, a bullet, whatever. And he was honestly going to do it. It was just a matter of him, finally finding a spot that fit him. He was comfortable with doing it and then just building from there. And I think that's where he's at now.
There's just no way that Craig Young doesn't make a big impact this year. I don't know what his ceiling is. I don't know what his floor is, but I have to think that he is going to be a regular on that defense. I don't know exactly where he's going to line up. I think there's still some question mark around how they're going to best utilize him. But this kid, for Buckeye fans that have not gotten to know Craig Young very well yet, he is going to jump off the screen at you right away on game one. I mean, he is the real deal. And it sounds like he's had a great camp so far. So really looking forward to seeing him. He gave a lot of – go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think that's what's interesting about it, though, is the fact that there are so many different players on this defense and just on the team in general that, if they put any one combination, any combination of several different players out there, I don't think that you would really be able to tell the difference. Even if they don't match the same frame, the same speed, any of that stuff, the same formations, those kind of things. I think that just the type of player that they recruit, and they're at the point where they're recruiting for depth more than anything. They're not recruiting for somebody to come in and be an immediate starter. If that happens, that means that you have, a five-star talent, generational talent. If they come in and are starting from day one, this is just a matter of you're basically reloading that next five-star to fill in for this person. So, he really fits that mold. And then you're going to have other players like Ronnie Hickman, Court Williams, like those kind of players. Very different body types, but they're going to still end up producing the same result.
It was pretty apparent that Craig Young and Ronnie Hickman have a good relationship. Craig was very thoughtful with his answer when he was asked about Ronnie Hickman in particular, the impact he's had on him. Just made it pretty apparent that he feels he has made the strides he has because Ronnie's helped kind of guide him along. And I think the Buckeyes are hoping that Hickman can have a good year, even if that means that it's in mentoring a guy like Craig Young. Certainly hopeful that Hickman can play well.
Well, I think that's what's really interesting too about the setup of these interviews. Back in the day, we used to get every player would come out at the same time. It would be one big media scrum for 50, 60 different players. And then these days we get 8, 9 players at a time, all the same position unit, and they're always complimentary of other ones. You ask one player about the person who's sitting at the table beside him, and he's literally just gushing over that player. Even if he's somebody who is going to be competing with him for playing time, somebody who's in front of them, those kind of things, they have nothing but good things to say about the other person.
Let's talk Court Williams for a minute, because I think Matt Barnes might have had the line of the day when he said that he wouldn't be surprised if Court Williams was the president of the United States someday. Kerry Combs, specifically pointed out Court Williams to us earlier in camp when he said that, this is a guy who is truly first in, last out, lives in the weight room and in the training room and in the film room. And I think, today with Court Williams having a chance to get his face on camera and get in front of the media, you got a real sense for how seriously he takes his craft. This is not, to quote professional golfer Kevin Kisner, for Court Williams, this ain't no hobby. He is out there, trying to make this his thing. And, he came straight out and said, maybe that ACL injury was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it heightened his focus. He's done what he needed to do from a rehab perspective to get healthy. And now he feels like he can really contribute this year. And boy, if the Buckeyes can get what they hope they can from him, it's another huge piece in this secondary.
I think this was something we talked about a couple weeks ago too, with just the impact that Court could have had last year as well. I mean, obviously he came in, enrolled early. He was the first person in his class right before Jackson Smith-Njigba got his black stripe removed. It was Court. He was somebody who they were talking about coming in, making an instant impact as a freshman. And then obviously he very first or second day of fall camp had the ACL injury, and he kind of talked about that today. And it was interesting to hear his perspective on that. A lot of people would say, oh, I remember everything about my injury. It was so hard. And he was basically like, it did suck, but I don't remember exactly how it happened because I'm not focused on that anymore. Like, I'm only worried about becoming a better player and having an impact on the team moving forward. And that to me speaks volumes.
Yeah, wasn't that weird? I mean, he literally said like that the memory of when he got injured, he said, I've like blacked it out in my mind. And, you could tell he was like trying to think about it, and it just, it was fuzzy to him. All the credit, for him. I don't know if he's been working with a mental coach in that regard, but I would think that it takes someone with an elite level of focus and concentration and dedication to put so far in the back of your mind something that, could have, some guys could, get an ACL surgery and don't come back the same way anymore. I mean, it's not, obviously an ACL tear is not like an uncommon injury. It happens, but it's not a 100% guarantee that you're going to be the same player you were. But I would think that from the mental perspective, treating this the way Court has treated it is going to give him the best chance to still be the best player he can be. I found that really, really impressive because I don't think a lot of people could quite do that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of it speaks to just kind of the program that he's come from too. If you look at these schools that Ohio State recruits at too, like St. John Bosco, where Court and Wyatt Davis came from before him, it's one of the top programs in the country, and they're going to have all those kind of resources to help a kid get through something like that. So then, for him to be around a program like that in high school that has kind of that college feel to it, you'll see it with like IMG Academy, like those kind of things too, where they just kind of they train you so early on to think a certain way that once they get on campus, you don't see them. They're not your typical freshman. They're not your typical redshirt freshman where it takes them time to mature. They're already in that, if that makes sense. So, Court is it's kind of one of those things where he's like a product of his environment. You see that come out. And then just, like I said, that was just really impressive to see him be so focused on what the future holds and where he's going and not being impacted that much by the past.
Let's shift gears here to Josh Proctor because Josh was certainly a big part of the secondary last year and that he saw a lot of playing time. There were also times where, you've got the hero shot and the goat shot when a highlight happens, and Josh was the goat shot fairly often. He had a tough year at times. Now, he also made some really good plays, but I thought he had a lot of learning to do from last year, and I'm really interested to see how he puts that into play here in 2021. I think the overarching thought maybe from his little media session today is that he's kind of focused on all areas of his game. It's not one thing in particular. He's just trying to become a better all-around defender.
I think when it comes to Josh, you kind of saw I guess Ryan talks about this a lot. He talks about flashes. It's not necessarily like a consistent kind of thing, where they'll show like sparks of greatness where you see everything that this player can become, but it's only like from time to time. It's not, they can't put it all together. And then Josh kind of talked about this today. Like, he learned so much from Jordan Fuller. He was asked like who he wants to emulate and who he would like to be, at that next level and all of that. He talked about just like the relationship that he had with Jordan Fuller, the things that he told him, and like all of a sudden when Jordan left and then was still successful at the NFL level despite being, a late round NFL pick, it was kind of one of those things that Josh said it clicked to him. So it'll be interesting to see it like that applied to the field.
I don't want to get too deep down a rabbit hole with some of these other guys, but specifically from Bryson Shaw, Cam Martinez, Lathan Ransom, Marcus Williamson, what stood out from you and or to you from their conversations?
Yeah, there was a couple things, and I'll do quick little hitters on them, but Marcus Williamson came back for another year. Maybe you weren't expecting him to make a significant impact, but I think from a leadership standpoint, it was very important for him to come back. Like he just talked about like his development and how much he's changed over the years. And I think that even if you don't get a significant impact from him, like on the field, that like, the leadership standpoint is something that's going to be very helpful moving forward. And then Bryson Shaw, he talked about just being in a mentorship role as well. You don't know how much he's going to see the field, but then, he's taking Jansen Dunn under his wing and helping him immerse himself into the program. That's really something cool to see as well.
I think one of the other guys whose name came up today, and top of my head, I can't remember who said it, but somebody had also brought up Denzel Burke. Obviously, Jansen Dunn, an incoming freshman, so is Denzel, and you get the impression that along with J.K. Johnson, that maybe those three freshmen have started to separate themselves a little bit, just making a good impression right away in camp. Not a ton of, not a ton of need for them to get on the field right away because there is a group here that feels like they have a chance to make an impact. But by the same token, man, if things don't go well and you have to, work down the pecking order on the depth chart a little bit and figure out who can make plays, maybe it's not long before a guy like Jansen Dunn or Denzel Burke or J.K. Johnson starts seeing some more meaningful snaps.
Yeah, and then there's Jordan Hancock too, who's
right.
Another top 100 cornerback. So it's kind of one of those things that they don't need it, but if they're out there and we were out there for the entire practice last week, and you constantly heard Ja'Kalen Johnson with the tackle, Denzel Burke with a pass breakup, you got Quinn Temple on the mic and yelling out what the plays are and stuff, and it was like one of those things like, do you know if they're actually going to make an impact this year, or is it just should you be excited for what the future holds once they are in a role like that?
Ryan Day was laughing when he was asked about those two guys. He said that maybe they've got, some sort of blackmail on Quinn because he was kind of beating a dead horse saying their names over and over and over again at practice. Obviously, it makes an impact. I realize that's not a new thing in Columbus, but I think it's cool. And it helps guys, feel like there's some affirmation of what's going on. And when you make plays, it stands out. And, you got to go out and compete with your teammates every day. Guys on both sides of the football throughout camp have been asked, hey, you're a defensive guy, but what do you love about the way this offense goes? Court Williams, in fact, was asked that today, and he was a little coy about his answer, but he basically said they can run it, they can throw it, they can do it all. And there's some element of, if you're playing against the opposite side of the field and feeling like you're right with them step for step, that's proven to be a pretty good recipe for getting ready for Big Ten play, for winning the league and making a push in the college football playoff. Well,
there's kind of 2 points in that too. There's one in that, you have all this depth and all these players that are making, an impact in practice, and you hear their names called in practice, and it just makes you wonder, like, is this what it takes for them to finally, maybe get over that hump and, close the gap with Alabama, and if you go to an Alabama practice, that's what I fully expect to hear, 5-star freshman after 5-star freshman making an impact. And then, when the people in front of them leave, that's why they're always why they're winning national titles. Seemingly every recruiting class walks out with a national title. So, it's one of those things like if Ohio State is to get to that level and consistently stay at that level and beat Alabama, year after year, that's what they're going to need. And then 2, with the fact that, it might actually be more difficult for them in practice than I think it is for 99% of the games they play. If Cortland is talking about like, oh, well, we have to defend Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. What offense are they going to play this year that even comes close to that?
The words that you just said there really stand out to me are the gap between the Buckeyes and Alabama. And maybe we're too close to it because we cover Ohio State. There are some national football fans that think Alabama is just light years in front of the rest of the field. I realized the final score wasn't close last January. I'm just not using that as a measuring stick to compare where the Buckeyes are compared to Alabama. There's no doubt the Crimson Tide, especially in the college football playoff era, I don't think you can really make an argument. They've been the best team in the country. They have consistently been either national champions or right there. Obviously, Clemson's had a great run these last several years. The Buckeyes are in that same conversation. Oklahoma hasn't won a college football playoff game, but obviously they have run train on the Big 12. I just don't think there is that big of a gap between the Buckeyes and Alabama. I think if you use last January's game, that's just not a fair microcosm to judge that by.
Yeah, I would agree with that from the standpoint of if you ask anybody on Ohio State's team, they're going to tell you they practiced one time.
Sure.
One time between the Sugar Bowl and the national championship. And quite frankly, when you're going to be covering like Alabama literally trotted out every major award winner on offense for that game. So to say that they were ever going to win that game, I don't know. Under those circumstances, that's not going to happen. You could play that game 10 times. But I think where I see the gap with Alabama is more, and I read an article on this recently. I cannot remember who wrote it. I think it was Pete the Mel, maybe. He was talking about just kind of the sideline aspect of it. Alabama has all these analysts, that Ohio State is starting to bring on. They made some hires. Paul Rhodes was one of them this offseason. Yep. I think that there's gaps. Yeah, I think there's gaps more in that aspect that are closing. And I think it's just the constant consistency that Alabama has to be able to go to the playoff every single year and win a national title pretty much every 3 years. I don't think that Ohio State has that consistency yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Obviously you're winning the Big Ten every single year. You're going to the college football playoff every year. There's obviously a sense of consistency there. But when I watch Alabama play, I don't really see this with Ohio State under Ryan Day anymore. But I think that you saw it a little bit with Urban was where they kind of just walked into things and said, oh, well, we're better than everybody else, and this is how it's going to go. You don't see that with Ryan Day. He's just very focused on the finer details. I think that they are closing that gap, but it definitely still remains.
Well, the Buckeyes haven't lost a game within their own division since 2016. The ugly wounds that might still be open in the last few years, losing at Iowa, losing at Purdue. Did those games ruin national championship hopes? Probably. Obviously, Ohio State knows that it is possible to go to the college football playoff after losing an early season game because they did it. But by the same token, look at what it took for them to get there. They had to absolutely flat out embarrass Wisconsin in the national, or I should say in the Big Ten championship game, just to sneak into the 4-team playoff.
Yeah.
For now, the playoff isn't expanding, hasn't yet expanded, maybe will. We'll see. Ever since Texas and OU jumped to the SEC, now the once certain 12-team playoff suddenly becomes maybe a little less certain. We'll see how that goes. But again, my point is, the Buckeyes have to make sure that they don't overlook teams on their schedule because there's just not a lot of wiggle room, man. If you lose a game, you got a really hard time still making the playoff.
Yeah, even if you look back at that 2014 game, if Wisconsin scores 21 points, if Ohio State only scores 40, they don't jump TCU or hold off Baylor in that. There was even some national pundits who were like, why is Ohio State jumping a team that just won its conference? It was one of those things where they got really lucky, and you can't ever really bank on that to happen. So, the best way to go about it is to obviously win every game. And I think, again, that's kind of what I'm talking about when it comes to, just the focus under Ryan Day. And he kind of talked about this a couple weeks ago. It's just, if there was a 12-team playoff, you would be able to kind of have wiggle room. You would kind of understand, like, every game isn't as dire. Like, you're focusing on the end goal. But at least still for now, college football isn't about that. Like, you have to go into every single game and win as convincingly as possible and make sure that you have a seat at the table.
The Buckeyes are really close to flipping the page here totally to Minnesota. In fact, today inside the extremely sweaty and sticky Woody Hayes Athletic Center in this incredibly humid month of August, underneath the main sign that says Ohio State Buckeyes right in the middle of the Woody Hayes Center. It said beat Minnesota. I mean, there is definitely a feeling of, okay, training camp is, pretty much winding down now, especially with an opener on a Thursday night. Today was the last morning practice of training camp because the semester starts tomorrow. So the Buckeyes will now shift to practicing in the afternoon at roughly 4:30 each day. We will not hear from anybody tomorrow. We will have a chance to visit with the wide receivers and with Brian Hartline, who, on top of having maybe just the most ridiculously talented group in America, he's also turned himself into one hell of a recruiter. Pretty excited to talk with that group on Wednesday. That's kind of the big takeaway right now. The starting quarterback is C.J. Stroud. Buckeyes are 10 days away from, or at this point, inside a week and a half from starting the season, and you can really feel the engine starting to rev up. Ryan Day said today about the offensive line, he feels that they are really far along in the process of having DeJuan Jones at right tackle and having Thayer Munford at left guard. Thayer obviously was voted a captain. If the Buckeyes trot out that offensive line to start week one, we kind of expect it now because we've seen it in practice, but I don't think anybody expected to see that at the start of camp. There are a few of those kinds of subtle differences that I think Buckeye fans are really looking forward to seeing when they take the field. But it's just nice to know that we are pretty much there, man. It is just about go time here.
I do want to make a note, though, about that, the offensive line, because those players are averaging something like 6'8", 330.
It's stupid.
For an that's literally bigger than NFL offensive lines. So I am interested to see how, because there's a difference in playing tackle versus playing guard, just the height that you have to have your body. Paris Johnson talked about that as well, because he's another guy who is a tackle at heart. He's going to play tackle at the next level. So, for him to learn that as well. But, I said this when Chris Olave announced that he was coming back. I said it didn't matter who the quarterback was, just because of the weapons that he was going to have around him. And I kind of feel the same way about running back. We talk about how we're not certain who's going to, be in a feature role in the running backs room. There's 5 running backs. But at the same time, literally, if you're running behind DeJuan Jones, Paris Johnson, Thayer Munford, Nicholas Petit-Frere, and Harry Miller, it doesn't matter. I could be back behind that offensive line, and I'm going to run for 100 yards and touchdown.
Just for fans that maybe don't know the heights and weights of these guys off the top of their head, from left to right. So if Nick Petit-Frere is your starting left tackle, he's listed at 6'5", 315. Thayer Munford moves to left guard. He's 6'6", 320. Harry Miller is your projected starting center, 6'4", 315. Sophomore Paris Johnson, 6'6", 315. He'd be your right guard. And your right tackle would be 6'8", 360-pound DeJuan Jones.
And then let's throw some
I don't care who the starting quarterback or running back is, man. It's got a chance to be a good year.
Right. And once you throw on the helmets, the pads, the cleats, they're even bigger than that. So it's pretty crazy. Now, Minnesota has an offensive lineman that's pretty big, too. I think he's I remember he went to IMG, I think. And he's something like 6'9", 350, and that's just wild.
Yeah,
So.
I saw a video actually of him. His name escapes me at the moment, but I saw a video of him working out the other day. He is one massive human being.
I believe it's Daniel. His last name starts with an F, and I would butcher it if I try to pronounce it. But yeah, he's a big kid.
Well, the good news for the Buckeye defensive ends is that they've been going up against those kinds of guys in practice every day, and so that's the advantage you have of playing against your own teammates for a while when they're some of the best in the country. It really is true, man. Iron sharpens iron, and this team feels like they've got a really good chance to have a great season. So excited to follow the Buckeyes here in 2021, and certainly we'll watch that defensive back group with a fine-tooth comb, man. They've got a lot to prove, but they feel they've got a good chance to do it. That'll wrap things up. David, I saw your comment about Ja'Kalen Johnson and Jordan Hancock. Hopefully we addressed that for you. I think we're looking forward to seeing those guys here in this season. We'll talk on Wednesday with Brian Hartline and the wide receivers, so we'll certainly have some content coming your way about those guys. And by the time Wednesday night rolls around, it's officially going to be game week as the Buckeyes get ready for Minnesota on Thursday, September 2nd. For Andrew Lind, I'm Brendan Gulick. We'll see you real soon. Buckeye Breakdown podcast available on YouTube, as well as and really anywhere you want to find your podcast, Spotify, the Apple Store, Google Play, Pandora, anywhere you like to get your typical podcasts, we are available. So hope you'll find us there soon. And BuckeyesNow.com for all the latest. See you soon. Buckeyes and Minnesota, just 10 days away. Talk to you soon.